Bills Mafia. On today's Air Raid Hour pregame, we will be breaking down what we expect to see from the Bills this afternoon versus the Dallas Cowboys, plus previewing key matchups and handing out our pregame superlatives. But first,
welcome to the Air Raid Hour, a Cover One Network podcast. Here are your hosts, Judge Mathis and Tilt Money.
Bills Mafia, welcome into the Air Raid Hour pregame show presented by the Cover One Sports Network and Picasso's Pizza. The Buffalo Bills take on the Dallas Cowboys today, 4:25 Eastern Time from Orchard Park, New York. We finally get a little reprieve from Tony Romo and Jim Nantz. I know I don't have the problem with them that some other people do, but we get Greg Olsen and the Fox crew on the game today. And before we get started today, Dave, this might be the best team the Bills have faced all season. I mean, I'm looking back. I felt quietly confident going into the Eagles game because the Eagles hadn't, I thought, been playing to their potential. I felt really confident going into the Chiefs game because I felt like the Chiefs hadn't been playing to their potential. Looking back at it, I haven't been this unconfident in the Bills, despite the fact that the Bills have been playing poorly in some stretches. I haven't been I haven't had this lack of confidence in the Bills going into a game since maybe week 4, and maybe lack of confidence is the wrong word, but maybe the scared, right? Concerned heading into a game because of the opponent since the Miami Dolphins game in week 4. The Dallas Cowboys are playing their best ball right now. In the last 5 weeks, they are 5-0. They've allowed 20 plus points just one time during that stretch, and that was a short week, a Thursday night football shootout against Seattle. They've been averaging 40.2 points per game in that stretch, albeit against some bad football teams. And they just trounced an Eagles team that the Bills went toe-to-toe with and could not beat. So this is a big test for the Buffalo Bills today.
I do think overall the Dallas Cowboys are one of the most complete teams in the NFL. If not, you could make an argument one of the most complete team in the NFL. And people will point to their schedule. I get that.
Yeah.
4 of their last 5 games have been at home. 4 of their last 5 games have been against teams like the Giants, Panthers, Commanders, and Seahawks. And I get that. That's a big reason why they're on this 5-game winning streak. I get that. The Bills being at home today is a bit of a neutralizing or an equalizing factor, I think. But I would agree that this is probably the toughest test the Bills have had. And it's probably in a situation where the Bills may be under the most pressure. Now, I know there's a pathway for the Bills to still make the playoffs if they lose this game. It's not a conference game, so that obviously helps a little bit. But, man, the Broncos losing yesterday, and then obviously the Steelers losing. Obviously, Vikings blew that game against the Bengals. But the Bills move up to 9th, right, without even playing yet. So this is huge. The Bills at home, big game, afternoon slot. Dallas Cowboys, I think I agree, are the best team the Bills have played this year and playing the best right now.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly isn't the end of the world for the Buffalo Bills if they do drop this game, because if they do win out, which again is tough, but they have to win out. If they win out after this, they still, according to New York Times, have an 83% chance to make the postseason. So this is not like a stake through the heart of the Buffalo Bills if they lose this football game, but it also could be key if the Buffalo Bills still have any hope of winning the AFC East. They really got to beat the Dallas Cowboys today and hope that a team like the New York Jets can upset the Miami Dolphins today, and I'm quietly confident in that. Obviously, this is not a Miami Dolphins New York Jets pregame show, so maybe at the end we can talk about that a little bit. So
Titans playing the Texans without Stroud, and Nico Collins is out, Tank Dell is out. So I mean, maybe the Titans with a little bit of momentum as well after that win against Miami can help us out and beat the Texans today as well.
Speaking of the home field advantage the Buffalo Bills have today, let's take a quick peek at the weather before we get started today. 40s, cloudy, Some winds today, about 15 miles per hour, and rain projected in the second half. This could be an issue for the Dallas Cowboys, who are 2-2 in outdoor games this year. The fact they've only played 4 outdoor games this year is crazy.
Mhm.
And all 3 of the losses for the Dallas Cowboys have come on the road. 2 of those, they have not beat a winning team on the road this year as well. They are 0-2 against teams above 500 on the road. So being at home, the weather, all of these things should be an advantage for the Buffalo Bills.
It should be an advantage, and I think I will say this, right? I mean, if you wanna take a look and, Philadelphia reference, movie reference, Silver Linings Playbook, whatever, it's against the
Yeah.
Eagles. Uh, that Eagles game, right, was in bad conditions, and the Bills really played a strong game in that game, especially offensively, right?
Mhm.
And I think if you're the Bills against a tough NFC East opponent, like you were playing in the Eagles a couple weeks back in rainy conditions, albeit the wind maybe wasn't quite as bad as it might be today in Orchard Park, but rainy conditions, it rained that entire game against the Eagles. But now the Bills get this game at home in what could be similar conditions to what that Eagle
Mhm.
was. I think that's something that the Bills can hang their hat on and say, hey, look, we played in a game like this just a few weeks ago and we played well offensively. So, the wind probably maybe a bigger factor in the kicking game, etcetera, but I would think the Bills should go into this game feeling pretty confident, even in the rain, that they can move the ball on offense.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, you saw the Dallas Cowboys. It's definitely a concern for them. This week in practice, they were having their receivers dip their hands in ice buckets before going out to catch passes, which I'm fine with. But the cheesiest thing that I saw this week was them putting Bills defenders on like the blocking dummies. Like
Oh
I
my god.
cannot stand when I see that. The New York Jets pulled that move earlier this season, and we lost to the New York Jets week 1. I was so ticked off because that's just the cheesiest thing you can do. I really need the Bills to go out and stomp the Cowboys just for that. Just for
Out of
that.
principle. Out of
Just,
principle. That's
just you can't allow a team to do that and then beat you. Like you just can't. Projected inactives for this game. The Buffalo Bills inactives are pretty much already set because Kyrie Elam and Justin Shorter did not get elevated from injured reserve. There were no practice squad elevations. So unless there's a Poona Ford upset in the making here, the projected inactives for the Buffalo Bills and the likely inactive for the Buffalo Bills, Alec Anderson, Jermaine Ifedi will once again, because knock on wood, the Bills offensive line has stayed healthy this year, will again be inactive. Poona Ford will likely be inactive. And then the other 2 go to the 2 injured players the Buffalo Bills have in Micah Hyde and AJ Epinesa. Before we get to Dallas's injuries and Dallas's possible inactives, Micah Hyde, he is out. Stinger, at least for now, he has not been put on injured reserve. So maybe a little bit of positive news regarding his ability to possibly play again this season, or this regular season at least. We're likely to see Taylor Rapp at free safety, and then Cam Lewis come in at free safety and Taylor Rapp move into or slide into his thick dime role when the Buffalo
mhm.
Bills go into that 6DB formation. What are your thoughts on how the Buffalo Bills need to maneuver today without Micah Hyde? Do you agree with Taylor Rapp once again getting the nod at free safety?
I do. If just out of
Mhm.
sheer experience and just the bodies we have. I mean, like, it's not ideal because you're going up against the likes of CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks, a deep threat. I know the illness going through
Mhm.
the Cowboys locker room, but I mean, I'm sure he's going to end up playing. Gallup also can get down the
Yeah.
field, so it's not a great situation for the Bills to be without their center fielder. But at the end of the day, like, the Bills have navigated fairly well this year throughout these injuries they've had on defense, and they've pieced it together.
Yeah.
Today would probably be their biggest test of the season, but yeah, I don't really see a great alternative to Taylor Rapp,
Mhm.
kinda manning that back end, and I thought he did a pretty good job against the Chiefs as well, so,
Yeah.
when Micah Hyde came out of that game, so we'll see.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be Taylor Rapp. I don't. Part of me just maybe wants to give the nod to Cam Lewis at free safety, just because I see him more as a center fielder. I've just never liked Rapp's fit as a free safety, right? Like I've always thought and envisioned him sort of in that Jordan Poyer role, closer to the line of scrimmage. And I understand the Buffalo Bills play split safeties and they do this and they do that, but Poyer spends most of his time at or around the line of scrimmage, and I think that is better for Taylor Rapp's game because of his physicality. Being forced to center field is not his strong suit, but as you said, he's got that veteran experience and things of that nature. So he will be likely the one that gets the nod at free safety, and it makes the most sense. The other major injury is a guy who's been playing very, very well this season, and that is AJ Epinesa. Hurt himself on his interception last week with a rib injury. He also avoided injured reserve, even though Sean McDermott did not sound confident the Buffalo Bills will get him back anytime in the next couple of weeks. So you're probably going to get, in my opinion, a heavier dose of Rousseau, who's finally worked his way back from that foot injury, and Leonard Floyd today. I think you're maybe see an uptick even in their snap percentages this week, and you'll see them on the field more. Behind them, you have Von Miller, who lost the knee brace last week and played a little bit better. You obviously have Shaq Lawson, who's going to have a more probably defined role with AJ Epinesa out. And then Kingsley Jonathan will be active and sprinkled in as well. What are your thoughts on the Buffalo Bills pass rush without AJ Epinesa, who's been a big part of that rotation?
Yeah, he's been a big part of the rotation. And one of the things that we talked about with Epinesa going into the season was like, yes, he had the 6.5 sacks last year, but like how many of those sacks were impactful plays? And I think this year you can say that he's had some quite impactful plays on the defense, right? His sacks, okay, fine, but like the interception, obviously last week, he's had a bunch of balls that he's batted down this year. So that is a big loss for the Bills, but I do like that it seems like Von Miller is on the upswing. And I do like that maybe Kingsley Jonathan's going to get a little chance to showcase himself in the rotation as well. So at the end of the day, with Floyd and Groot, this is going to be a huge, huge test for the Bills defensive line just in general for this game. It does sting to be without Epinesa, but I do think that if Von Miller is kind of on the upswing here, we've been getting good production from Leonard Floyd this year. Rousseau looks to he's not 100%. I get that, but the bye really seems to have helped him, and he came out in that Chiefs game and played really well. So if you're looking for kind of like a positive in this whole thing, it's that it looks like Gregory Rousseau and Von Miller are getting healthier and playing a little bit better. So while it's not ideal, I think the Bills can manage this one. And I think if you look ahead with AJ Epinesa and you say you got the Chargers, a week ahead, and then the Patriots, it's like, if you can survive this game and maybe he's out for the next game or two after that, if you can get him back maybe for that last week in Miami, I think that would be what the Bills maybe are hoping for. So we'll see.
Because he's had some big games in his career against the Miami Dolphins. Even when he was struggling in the early parts of his career, he always seemed to show up against the Miami Dolphins. Looking at the Cowboys, possible inactives and injuries, things that they're dealing with. You mentioned that there was an illness going throughout the locker room, and who knows, maybe that plays to the Bills' advantage this week. You never know. These guys are absolute freaks. You pump them full of fluids and this and that, and they go out there and they, play and they give their all-pro performances, even when they're battling illnesses that would knock us on our couch for a week. So who knows really what you're going to get, but some key players are dealing with an illness, like Micah Parsons dealing with an illness, no injury designation. Stephon Gilmore and Cooks, it was so bad. Brandon Cooks, it was so bad that they were questionable, but Ian Rappaport reported last night that they are both likely to play with their illnesses. Outside of illnesses, they have Malik Hooker dealing with an ankle. He's iffy to play. He's questionable. I've been reading some things like maybe he has a chance to play, maybe he doesn't. Even if he plays, it seems like he's going to be hindered by that ankle. And then the big injury for the Dallas Cowboys is last week they lost Jonathan Hankins. To me, for them, I think that's the equivalent of losing a Daquan Jones-ish type of player. I haven't watched enough Cowboys football to know whether, Jonathan Hankins was playing at Daquan Jones's level that Jones was playing at, because I feel like that might be disrespectful to Jones the way he played and started the season, because he was literally all pro caliber. But Jonathan Hankins is that space eating, free other people up, give you the occasional pass rush type of dude in this Dan Quinn defense, right? He plays that Daquan Jones type role. He frees up a lot for guys like Odigizuna and Micah Parsons. They have Mozzie Smith, their first round pick, to replace him, but he has underwhelmed. I think the key here with this Jonathan Hankins injury is the Buffalo Bills need to establish the run early, and they need to keep running it.
They do. And I mean, I think as we get to some of the key matchups in this game, this is a big game for the Bills offensive line as well. Yeah. We're going to talk about that as we kind of transition here to talk about the Bills offense in just a second. But I would say, like, even holistically, like the Bills certainly worse off from an injury front than the Dallas Cowboys. I think the Dallas Cowboys, yes, Hankins has been a space eater, but I also don't think he's been on the same level as Daquan Jones, at least from the games I've seen. The interior of that Dallas defensive line, yes, they've created opportunities for the guys on the outside, but probably the weakest part of that defense in my estimation. So yes, it's good for the Bills, but the Bills will kind of have to, I think, continue to do what they've been doing the last few weeks, and that's stay committed to the run game.
All right, before we get into talking about the Buffalo Bills offense versus the Dallas Cowboys defense, a quick word from the guys over at the Cover One Buffalo podcast on the best ways you can support us here at Cover One.
Many people ask us the best way to support us here at Cover One, and that is to sign up to become a Cover One Pass member. That contribution helps give us the access to all the data and information we use to create the content that you love.
And I think most importantly, brings you into our community of insiders. It's a great community based on Slack. I know a lot of people don't want to be on social media anymore or be in on those conversations. We bring all of it to you right in our great community of educated fans. And most importantly, you get access to our content creators.
Even better than that, everybody loves merch. You get awesome t-shirts, a cool decal, and a letter from the Cover One team signed directly to you.
All for $60. That gets you the entire season, next year's free agency and draft. $60. Click the link in the description. Cover One Insider. Become one today.
You got a really great comment from Spin 0481 really early on here. He says Bills need to have Kincaid go off so they can rub it in Dallas's face that the Bills robbed Dallas of him in the draft. Not only that, but Sam Laporta, 3 touchdowns last night for the Detroit Lions. So Dalton Kincaid, maybe he needs to show up and be a big part of this offensive game plan for a number of non-important reasons, like rubbing it in Dallas's face and keeping up with Sam Laporta. But more importantly, to take pressure off of guys like Stefon Diggs, and just because we need Dalton Kincaid to continue to be a focal point of this offense.
He does, and as you start to kind of talk about this Bills offense and how they match up against the Cowboys defense, 5th overall in DVOA, 6th in pass, 6th in rush. You start to look into the more granular numbers on how they fare against opposing wide receivers and tight ends. 9th against wide receiver 1s, 2nd against wide receiver 2s, 4th against wide receiver 3s, and 3rd against running backs out of the backfield, but 23rd against tight ends. So Dalton Kincaid, from an advanced analytics perspective on paper, has the best matchup of the Bills pass catchers, including running backs out of the backfield. So yeah, it would be a nice day for Dalton Kincaid to have a game.
Roy Collins comes in and says Knox may have a bigger blocking role this game. Yeah, I think back to the Las Vegas game, right, where there was this dominant pass rushing threat in Max Crosby that the Buffalo Bills did a really good job neutralizing. In a big way in which they did that was utilizing Dawson Knox, keeping him in line, chipping, etc., and giving Spencer Brown a little bit of a reprieve. So it'll be interesting to see how the Buffalo Bills decide to go about blocking Micah Parsons, which we'll get to in a little bit as well. But looking at this Cowboys team, they feast off of front running. I mean, they get a lead, and it's not a knock on them. Like they get a lead, and then they spend the rest of the game maintaining that lead by making other teams' offenses one-dimensional, making teams have to pass the ball like crazy. So this is going to be a big test today, I think, for the Buffalo Bills offense to make sure that they're going toe-to-toe with, quite frankly, the best offense in the National Football League right now. And what I'm sort of getting at here is there's no room this week for execution errors. There's no room for penalties. There's no room for turnovers. Like, the Buffalo Bills offense likely needs to play close to, if not a perfect game, to keep up with these Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah, Cowboys defense has forced 7 turnovers in the last 4 games. They forced 3 turnovers against the Philadelphia Eagles. They forced at least 1 turnover in every single game this season, and they have 5 games where they forced multiple turnovers in a game this season. So the Cowboys defense is really good at taking the ball away. They're second best in the NFL in turnover differential. So again, we talked about this multiple times in multiple games, and it will hold true really every week for the Buffalo Bills and Josh Allen, who himself has had at least 1 interception in every single game this season, that the Bills really need to play a clean game on offense. There cannot be those errors, like you said. And look, we talked about the Bills being clean on offense. The Dallas Cowboys have been super clean on offense lately. So I fully 100% agree. If you can somewhat make the Dallas Cowboys uncomfortable on defense, even if it's a neutral
Yeah.
game script, right? I think that's in the advantage of the Bills because from a size perspective, like Micah Parsons is great, but if the Bills can stay on schedule and kind of stay ahead, or at least in a neutral game script with the Cowboys, then you somewhat take Micah Parsons' biggest strength, which is his pass rushing, out of this game. So, yeah, I'm 100% with you on that. It's going to be interesting because the Cowboys really haven't had a ton of adversity this year, if you think about it. Like a couple lost games on the road, but like recently they haven't faced a ton of adversity, especially in their last 5 games.
Yeah, in my notes here, I have feed James Cook early, don't go away from it, design some runs for Josh Allen. We need the running game, in my opinion, to be effective at all costs. Whatever it takes to get that running game to be effective this week, you got to go ahead and do it. And then I put touchdowns in the red zone for us, forcing field goals for them. In the midst of that mid-season hysteria, when our offense sort of fell off a cliff a little bit, one of the biggest things that people were yelling back and forth at each other over was, the perceived perception that Sean McDermott wanted these long extended drives to give his defense sort of a reprieve or a rest, but because it makes it much harder to execute, you got to be perfect. There's no room for penalties, because the next thing you know, if you're trying to go on these long sustained drives, you're either kicking field goals or you're punting, as opposed to scoring touchdowns or having more cracks at scoring touchdowns, but you're getting less possessions. So what are your thoughts on that? Because when you look at it today, going on some long sustaining drives, keeping the game close in the first half by like keeping the ball out of Dallas's hands, all of those things in a perfect world would play to the Bills' advantage, but they have to have the ability to go out there and actually do it, because if they can't, it could blow up in their face.
Yeah, it does put a lot of pressure on the execution. And we've seen that at times. We saw it in the Eagles game. We saw in the second half what that meant in the Chiefs game, even though the Chiefs only had 10 possessions in that game, the Bills only scoring those 6 second half points. So look, it sounds great in theory, but at the end of the day, the most important thing to me, and I would imagine Sean McDermott, is like, he probably does not care how long these drives takes as long as they end in touchdowns, right? I think that's the big thing for me. And you hit it just a second ago. Can't be settling for field goals if you're the Bills. You can't be stalling out in the red zone. Drive length, whatever, be damned, just score touchdowns. And whether that's 3-minute drives, whether that's 7-8-minute drives, if you score touchdowns and continuously put the pressure back on the Dallas offense in a game where they're on the road and outdoors, eventually I think that will play into the Bills' favor. I do think that you play a very dangerous game if you limit your own possessions as well. So I think that, like, to me, it's a very fine line, and ultimately it just means you have to score touchdowns on your possessions. And to me, time of possession, yes, that will be a big factor in this game, and I'm not saying it's not, but I think to me, red zone scoring for both teams is more important.
Josh Allen. Obviously, the Buffalo Bills need Josh Allen to have an MVP caliber performance if they're going to win this football game. I mean, a big picture thing that's you'll hear this conversation on Monday on First Take, and they probably had it this week on First Take. And we don't get into some of these conversations, but like this could be like the MVP defining game, right? If Josh Allen goes out and has this big, huge game and the Bills win, and then the Bills go and win their next 3 games, you're looking at Josh Allen maybe being the MVP of the National Football League. If Dak Prescott comes out here, wins this game, has good numbers, and the Dallas Cowboys do what they need to do to finish the season with a solid record, you're looking at probably Dak Prescott as the league's MVP. So this could be an MVP defining game for both of these quarterbacks. We're obviously going to start with Josh Allen because we're on the Bills offense right now. The Dallas Cowboys run the most man-to-man defense of any team in the National Football League. They run the most cover 1 defense of any team in the National Football League. Both of those things should be an advantage or a good thing for Josh Allen, who's been relatively good in terms of his advanced statistics versus cover 1 defenses this year. Man defense theoretically plays to the Bills' advantage as well. Josh Allen can make throws versus man-to-man that many players just in the National Football League cannot make. And when DBs turn their backs, it also leads to some big Josh Allen chunk runs. So the way that Dallas plays defense has made them very effective this year. But advanced statistics speaking, Josh Allen has had success against these types of defenses. A big day from him will be key.
A big day from him will be key. And I like what you mentioned about the defensive backs or defense in general, just having their backs turned. I think Josh needs to be very decisive today. I think he needs to make quick decisions against this man defense. I think there's going to be pressure coming from the edges with Parsons and Lawrence. And I think Josh has to be ready and willing. Again, we talked about Hankins being out and Mozzie Smith maybe being a little bit underperforming. That Bills interior offensive line has to be in a position where they can give Josh Allen room to step up in the pocket and to potentially take off, right, with his legs against this man-to-man defense. So to me, quick decision-making, sound decision-making, not being afraid to take off against this man-to-man defense using your legs, but there has to be room in the pocket for Josh Allen to step up and not, I mean, he's great at going around as well, but I think that somewhat plays into the Cowboys' strength. They have quick guys on the edge. I want to see Josh Allen stepping up through the middle of the pocket in today's game, being decisive and using his legs when appropriate. And against that man-to-man defense, it should really set up well for him, particularly with two guys. Stefon Diggs and Dalton Kincaid should have an advantage against man-to-man defense in this game. And I think Josh Allen's legs, those two guys are going to be key because rainy conditions, first downs at a premium potentially, like to me, it goes back to the point about him playing a clean game and making good decisions. Like that to me has to be key today, quick with the decision-making and efficient with the decision-making. So,
yeah, Charles G comes in and says Josh isn't attacking deep versus cover one, and that's the issue. Anthony Prohaska did a great job breaking it down this week on social media. I'm not sure whether he talks about it on the film room or on his show, but he dug into the advanced analytics for Josh Allen, and this is what he tweeted out earlier this week, and he talks about it in his show as well. Josh Allen has seen the fifth most cover one coverages in the National Football League this year. So he's seen it the fifth most of any quarterback. He's fourth in EPA, seventh in positive play percentage, eighth in passer rating, first in on-target percentage, second in catchable pass rating, eighth in yards, third in touchdowns versus cover one. But the issue that you do see against cover one, he's 27th in the average depth of throw at 9.9 yards. So that's something that if you're the Dallas Cowboys, who have gotten super into the analytics this year, they've been a lot better with some of their decision-making on fourth downs, etc. They've really dug in. I'm sure they're aware of that statistic and know Josh Allen's tendencies versus cover one. So it'll be really interesting to see if the Buffalo Bills can push the ball down the field. And that's going to come down to the wide receivers, which is something that I wanted to talk about in this game. I mean, the Buffalo Bills need to get their wide receivers going. And I'm not just talking about Khalil Shakir. I'm talking about their boundary wide receivers need to show up in a big way today. Stefon Diggs needs to get his groove back, and we need to see Gabriel Davis make some more plays. It's going to be really important, I think, for the Buffalo Bills today and their success to get the wide receivers, the boundary wide receivers, more involved.
Has to be. I mean, this can't be a one-dimensional passing offense even, right? James Cook led the team in receiving yards last week. The second highest was Dawson Knox with 30. I think it was 36 receiving yards last week against the Chiefs. Receivers 7 for 70 last week combined. That can't happen today, especially with Stefon Diggs is going to have his eye on CeeDee Lamb on the other side of the field. He's been one of the best wide receivers in the league this year as well. He's not going to want to be shown up by a guy like CeeDee Lamb in this game. And Gabriel Davis needs to make an impact. Now, I know there's been a lot of good breakdowns of like Gabriel Davis being open on a lot of plays recently. And maybe these last couple of weeks, seeing that on film, this is something the Bills can then take a look at and say, hey, we are going to have an opportunity to go deep a few times against this cover one. Gabriel Davis is likely going to have some decent chances to get behind the defense in this game. And so it's not just him, but it's also Josh Allen taking those chances and putting the ball where it needs to be. Obviously, we know about the miss in the Eagles game, and we saw the wide open play that he didn't read to in the Chiefs game. So I think there will be opportunities for guys like Gabe Davis in this game on the boundary. I think it's going to be a matter of execution. And again, the quick decision-making and being able to see and recognize that of your Josh Allen, because you got to find a way to stretch out this Dallas defense somehow, right? And Diggs has been quiet. It's been well documented, like his struggles over the last couple of weeks, and it's it's not necessarily his fault, but he's also had some drops too, right? So be a nice day for him and Davis to bounce back for sure.
Yeah, let's dig in a little bit more to the Stefon Diggs stuff. In the last 4 games, 17 catches on 36 targets. I mean, that is not great. For 159 yards and a touchdown. Eric and Anthony, I think, did a really good job on the film room this week, breaking down some of the issues that you're seeing in getting Stefon Diggs the ball. They're taking away some of the Buffalo Bills' go-to things that they like to do on second down to get Stefon Diggs the ball. And then they're going and they're bracketing Stefon Diggs on third down. So they're making it super challenging to get the ball into the hands of Stefon Diggs on second down and on third down. The Buffalo Bills have been more in tune to running the ball, et cetera, on first down this year. So there's not as many opportunities for Stefon Diggs to make some plays on first down, but maybe that's something you look to do, is to get Stefon Diggs the ball in his hands on first down as opposed to attempting to do it on second or third down. Either way, the Buffalo Bills need to find a way to get the ball into Stefon Diggs' hands. I think some of this is on Joe Brady, right? Like I look around the league and, Jake Browning's throwing passes to Jamar Chase and he's got no problem getting targeted double-digit times a game, right? CeeDee Lamb has been popping off this year. The Dallas Cowboys are having no problems getting the ball into the hands of CeeDee Lambs. You see wide receiver ones around the league getting fed the football and getting fed the football efficiently. The Buffalo Bills need to figure out a way to do that with Stefon Diggs because he's your alpha. He's your number one. I think some of that falls on Josh Allen, right? He's got to do a better job. And then some of it falls, I think, on Gabriel Davis too, right? Like Gabriel Davis needs to make defenses feel his presence.
Yep.
I think a large part of what makes CeeDee Lamb so successful this year is that opposing teams know that if the Dallas Cowboys don't want to give the ball to CeeDee Lamb, they can also give it to Brandon Cooks or Michael Gallup, right? There are options in Dallas, legitimate options on who you can throw the football to. And that, if you're a defensive coordinator, plays a role in the way that you defend CeeDee Lamb. I don't think the way Gabriel Davis is playing football right now really dictates the way defensive coordinators defend him. It doesn't take away from their preparation for Stefon Diggs, right? So I think the Buffalo Bills this offseason need to do a better job and use a first-round pick on a wide receiver, go out, spend some money on a wide receiver, or use a second pick on a wide receiver and really upgrade the skill position talent around Josh Allen, because I just like Gabriel Davis needs to have a big game today, and maybe he does, but I just don't think the threat is there to take the pressure off of Stefon Diggs.
Yeah, and a player, Gabriel Davis, who has been inefficient, we'll say, and part of it is the style of the routes and things that he does, right? He's a high yards per catch guy, but he's not like super efficient with his targets. And some of that's by design. I get that. Like he's not going to be as efficient as a guy like Stefon Diggs when a lot of his stuff is at and around the line of scrimmage, but Davis needs to at least make the defense respect him, right? Like, and to me, I think, yes, getting Stefon Diggs involved early in the game is important, but I also wouldn't hate them trying to get Gabriel Davis involved in the game early as well to take some of that pressure off, because that could start to free up some things underneath. So either or, right? I think it's a fine balance, right? Because we talk about Bills needing to kind of maybe establish the run game, et cetera. So it'll be very interesting to see what the script is for the Bills coming out offensively. Do they go with the run game more so? Do they go target the receivers? Do they go after a guy like Dalton Kincaid, who has statistically a decent matchup? I'm going to be fascinated to see how Joe Brady comes out and attacks this Dallas defense early in the game from a script standpoint.
Yeah, 100%. And you said it, like, feel free to feed Gabriel Davis because he is capable. I mean, we've seen him do it. We saw the Tampa Bay game he had this year where he was targeted a number of times and how that affected the way teams had to play other guys. It opened things up for guys like Khalil Shakir, et cetera. So if Buffalo can come out and they can get Gabriel Davis involved early, that could maybe lead to a big second half for a guy like Stefon Diggs if Dallas has to adjust the way that they are defending, because a guy like Gabriel Davis is popping off, and he's certainly capable because he's had games like this in his career. Another thing that I have my eye on and I'm concerned about is the Dallas Cowboys pass rush. And there's obviously one big time player in Micah Parsons, 12.5 sacks. He's the lead leader in pass rush win rate. They have some other dudes up front in Odigizua, Dexter Lawrence, Sam Williams, Dante Fowler. They have guys who can get to the quarterback. Dan Quinn is pretty good at scheming guys to get to the quarterback. It's going to be really interesting to see how the Buffalo Bills go about trying to stymie or slow down this Dallas Cowboys pass rush. And as you mentioned earlier on the show, it's going to be a big week for the Bills offensive line.
Big week for the Bills offensive line, and I know the Cowboys analytically are good at defending running backs out of the backfield, but here's the thing, like last two games, obviously Cowboys still beat the Eagles and still beat the Seahawks, but 136 rushing yards, 72 rushing yards against the Seahawks, 106 rushing yards for the Eagles. They have allowed 5 of their last 6 games teams to run for over 100 yards, and now it's not necessarily like big 100 plus yard games. It's right around 100, hovering around 100. But for a defense that relies on Micah Parsons and that pass rush, like I think the Bills need to have some semblance of a running game today. And yes, a lot of that should come down to James Cook, but Josh Allen running the ball as well. The offensive line is going to have their work cut out for them. Maybe they are a group collectively that take me higher unit of the game. We'll see. But yes, it is going to be really important. I think especially early in the game, interior offensive line, as the game wears on, Spencer Brown, Deion Dawkins are going to need, like the whole unit's going to have a good effort today. But again, I think it comes down to what do the Bills want to do today? And so collectively, the unit needs to have a good day, but depending on what the Bills want to do, it could be like, okay, maybe guys like Torrance and Morse and McGovern need to be the guys to focus. But Spencer Brown, to me, is kind of the X factor here. Micah Parsons has been lining up all over the field, on the left, on the right. The Bills have to know where he is on every play. And so it's not like he's lining up in one spot every game or every snap. So that's the other thing you got to watch out for too with Parsons, is he's all over the field.
Yeah. And one of the other things that I'm low key worried about too is honestly the usage of James Cook, specifically in the second half. He was off the field a lot in the fourth quarter of the Chiefs game, right? He had a lot of carries in that first drive of the second half where the Buffalo Bills went down and kicked the field goal. And then I think he had 4 carries the rest of the football game. And a lot of that had to do with pass protection, right? The Buffalo Bills offensive line started to struggle against the pass rush of the Kansas City Chiefs. That took James Cook off the field and put Latavius Murray onto the field. Does that concern you at all? Because James Cook has been such a factor in this offense.
It does. I mean, that's why the Bills really need to stay on schedule in this game, and they can't really fall too far behind against Dallas and kind of play into Dallas's script that they really want is to let those pass rushers loose. Again, the Bills haven't been great at this, but like would like to see maybe James Cook get involved, like try to get a screen or two involved to him in this game. The Bills, again, haven't been great at doing this, but with the struggle, I guess, of the offensive line last week, it was not their best game. I would like to maybe see them sprinkle that in a bit. And so James Cook usage, yes, early on in that Chiefs game was heavily involved in the pass game, kind of went away from it when the Bills had to shore up that protection later in the game. That's a problem for the Bills, right? If you can't rely on James Cook for pass protection, because you kind of know what that means if you're a defense. If Latavius Murray's coming onto the field in kind of passing situations, it's for pass protection, right? And you eliminate, if you're the Bills, some of those tendency breakers if that's the situation you're forced into. So again, Kincaid and Cook both heavily used early in some of these games and then kind of trail off. I know a lot of people have mentioned that in the comments section as well today. So the usage throughout the game and not just early, I think, is something to look at.
Yeah, another key to the game is going to be the use of motion, which we've seen an uptick of in this offense with Joe Brady. The Buffalo Bills need to continue to utilize motion in this offense, provide some window dressing, putting defenders in conflict before the snap, testing their communication. The Bills have motioned on 60% of their passes, or at least 60% of their passes, for 3 straight games. They did so again against the Chiefs. The Cowboys defense this year, and this was from NFL Live, Dan Orlovsky and the NFL Live crew pulled this stat up, using QBR sort of as your gauge. The Dallas Cowboys defense is 4th in the NFL when there is no motion. So they are highly effective when there is no motion. And they are 20th in the NFL defending motion. Again, using ESPN's QBR as their metric for defining that statistic. So the Cowboys defense struggles when they are put into conflict and they are forced to test their communication.
Yeah, so the Bills need to continue that trend. We've been screaming for it all year, obviously, and obviously they've done a good job the last couple games in doing that more. I even kind of just like, anecdotally last week against the Chiefs, thinking to myself early in the game, I'm like, they're using Diggs in motion quite a bit, like more than I've seen lately. And that kind of played out in the actual data when you go back and look at the percentages. So needs to do that. This is obviously going to be a big key in determining and in confirming that the Dallas Cowboys are playing that man defense, right? Which you know very well went over their tendencies there. So I like that, and it also potentially could get a guy like James Cook or Dalton Kincaid from a motion standpoint in space or isolated against in a one-on-one matchup that's favorable. So motion not just for understanding the coverages, but also isolating guys into matchups that could be advantageous against man-to-man, I think is an underrated part of the window dressing here in today's game.
All right, let's transition now to the Buffalo Bills defense versus the Dallas Cowboys offense. One of the keys to this game for the Buffalo Bills is going to be putting pressure on Dak Prescott. In the 8 games this year that Dallas has won by 20 or more points, they have only surrendered 1 sack per game in those 8 games. In the 5 games that Dallas has either lost or won by 1 score, they've surrendered 4 sacks per game. Anthony Prohaska had a guest on this week who called Dak Prescott a buzzsaw of efficiency. The Buffalo Bills are going to have to crack the Dak Prescott code this week, and putting pressure on him is going to be a large part of that.
Putting pressure on him is key. You mentioned the games where he's been sacked. He's been sacked 29 times this year, which is 13th most in the league. But the other thing is, yes, the Bills front four needs to be able to get home today. The Bills need to look what happened in that game yesterday with the Vikings and the Bengals. Vikings getting that pass rush on Browning late in the game, and he's stepping through the Bills need to take Dak Prescott to the ground when they have their chances to get their hands on him, right? They cannot let him contain. They cannot let him break tackles when they get their hands on him with that pass rush. They can't let him outside the pocket. He is really good at making things happen outside the pocket as well. Probably one of the more underrated aspects of Dak Prescott's game is his ability to throw on the run, which is something that, obviously I'm sure Dallas content creators talk about quite a bit, but maybe in the national space isn't talked about a lot, but he's really good at that. And so when the Bills have a chance to get their hands on Dak Prescott, they need to bring him to the ground. The missed tackling, the missed chances to bring guys to the ground just cannot happen today. They need to take advantage. He's been sacked quite a bit this year. It's the one area we look about this offense is like, is there any weaknesses in this offense? Dak does get sacked at a decent clip. So I do think it's really important for Floyd, Miller, Rousseau. Those 3 guys really need to be on their game today.
Yeah, and Dak Prescott has been showing more of a willingness to run this year, right? He's got 44 carries through 13 games played. In 16 games in 2021, because he didn't play a full season last year, he only carried the ball 48 times. He's on pace to get more towards his like 2017, 2018 type of number of carries, as opposed to where he was the past couple of seasons where he was less willing to run. So you're seeing quarterbacks like Josh Allen realize the mistake and not being a threat to run, and Dak Prescott realizing the mistakes he's making and not being a threat to run because of just the conflict that it puts defenses in, the bind that it puts defenses in when a quarterback has that dual threat ability. And Dak Prescott has been doing that this year. Just looking at this offense, and again, they haven't been playing the best opponents, especially the last couple of weeks outside of Philadelphia, but they've scored on over half their drives this season. Their red zone efficiency might be middle of the road. I believe it's 15th, but that doesn't matter because they're just in the red zone so damn much. Like, Dak has not turned the ball over at all this season. 6 interceptions through 13 games. This could legitimately be this whole game, right? We're doing this whole pregame. We're feeling pretty confident. The Bills offense can do this, can do that. it could all be moot because this could be a recipe for disaster for the Buffalo Bills defense. They have not seen an offense like this since Miami, and they had a good game plan for Miami, but they had a hell of a lot more dogs when they went up against that Miami defense in week 4.
Yeah, and I'll go back to the Eagles game again. This is probably the closest thing you're going to get to an offense that, when it's on, could be at the same level as the Dallas Cowboys from a weaponry standpoint. The Chiefs obviously have had their struggles on offense this year, but they still have Patrick Mahomes. But outside of Travis Kelce, pretty unreliable receivers overall this year. The Cowboys don't have that issue this year. They have Tony Pollard. They have the 3 receivers you mentioned. They have Jake Ferguson. They're not a lot of missing or gaps in the weaponry for Dallas, right? So the Eagles, I think, are the closest team you can compare to, and the Eagles didn't have Dallas Goedert when the Bills played them. So the Bills defense going to have their hands full, especially down the 2 key guys.
And that defense got shredded in the second half when they were on their game too. Shredded. When they gave up 30 points in the second half of that football game.
Yep.
And that's the funny thing too, because the next thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about the weaponry that Dallas has, right? Hey, Brandon Beane, you should pay attention today when the Dallas Cowboys are out there on offense, because this is what you need to do to surround your franchise quarterback. And I understand the Buffalo Bills have put together a pretty good roster in totality, but I mean, you just look at that Dallas skill position, Tony Pollard, Michael Gallup, right? You look at Brandon Cooks, going out and getting Brandon Cooks, all the things that they do, Jake Ferguson, they have the dudes on offense, and they even have a depth receiver in Kevontae Turpin, who's just electric, right? With the ball in his hands, specifically on special teams. I literally put my 3 players to look out for list on this defense, and they were CeeDee Lamb, Tony Pollard, and Jake Ferguson. So I literally, in just naming 3 players to look out for in their offense, you're leaving off Michael Gallup and Brandon Cooks when I made this list. Like, that's how stacked this offense is. Plenty of weapons, plenty of places for Dak Prescott to go with the ball.
Plenty of places for him to go with the ball. And like, there may not be a better trio, tight end, wide receiver, and running back across the NFL, right? I mean,
they're the best skill position group in the league by far.
I mean, it's incredible. And Tony Pollard, you mentioned him. He has only had a 100-yard rushing game this season, but in his last 4 games, 20 combined receptions. So they've really kind of started using him more at more volume in the passing game, and he's always been a good pass catcher. So
he is having a down year, though.
He is having a down year. I mean, granted, for like where people expected him in fantasy and all this stuff and filling it, like, but the fact is, you can't take him lightly. He's still a great pass catcher. He can still get it done. And so while he's having a down year by his standards and probably what the fantasy community expected, he can still make life miserable for the Bills today. He's a good player.
Looking at obviously their big stud. Let's do Tony Pollard first. So 4.2 yards per carry, 796 yards on the season, 5 touchdowns. So obviously, like in running the ball, he's gotten better. He's gotten hotter over the last couple of weeks. But it's his threat as a wide receiver, right? In the screen game, in dump offs. He's been targeted 58 times this year. He's got 49 catches for 285 yards. The Buffalo Bills, they've had issues historically with running backs out of the backfield. So despite the fact that we're talking about how Tony Pollard has had a down year this year, he's the type of player who can make some back-breaking plays today, especially in the passing game.
Yeah, and we've seen this happen against the Bills, in the past. We saw Javonte Williams do this in the past game against them with Denver.
Ramondre Stevenson. I mean, even a guy like Rachaad White had his moments for Tampa Bay against the Bills as well. And even like last week, McKinnon and Allaire, while they weren't great, they had a couple plays in the passing game for the two of them. So it's just tough, right? Because Dallas forces you to make decisions on what you want to do defensively, and like you can't cover it all. So the Bills are going to have to be really conscious about what they do. It's going to be a tough matchup for them for sure. I'm honestly baffled at the way some offensive coordinators have chosen to attack the Buffalo Bills defense this year, because I look back and I look at some of the players who have made some backbreaking plays against the Buffalo Bills. Trey Tucker had that reverse, against us. Demario Douglas had some plays against us. Like, Dallas should be looking to get Kevontae Turpin on the field on offense to make some plays against us, some misdirections and things like that. They should be looking to get Kevontae Turpin the ball in space to attack us. They don't use Kevontae Turpin a lot on offense, but I think it would behoove them in this game to do so. Are they going to do it? Who knows, right? Guys like Ramondre Stevenson and Javonte Williams, they broke our backs this season, catching passes out of the backfield. I don't think opposing offensive coordinators are doing a good enough job attacking that. I thought Andy Reid did a piss poor job last week of getting the ball into Jerick McKinnon's hands. Maybe Jerick McKinnon's injury was to a point where he didn't feel like he could do that. But man, Jerick McKinnon should have saw 10 targets last week out of the backfield for the Kansas City Chiefs. I feel like there are teams that aren't attacking the Buffalo Bills defense in the proper manner. And just watching this Dallas Cowboys team the last couple of weeks, I don't think that they're going to have a problem feeding the ball to Tony Pollard, as you mentioned, 20 catches over the past couple of weeks. And then I wouldn't be surprised if you see Kevontae Turpin on the field.
Yeah, Turpin, he's like the Swiss Army knife, so to speak, of like maybe their version of what the Bills had in Isaiah McKenzie a few years ago. But when he gets the ball in space, he's a problem. And the Bills have had their struggles tackling. So he could, even on 2 or 3 touches in this game, make a play that really is game changing, right? Toxic differential. Aaron Quinn talks about that a lot. Like Turpin is the guy to me, if you're Dallas, like outside of Lamb, Pollard, like he could create one toxic differential type of play in this game that could really be the difference. So just a plethora of riches for the Dallas Cowboys on offense.
Speaking of a plethora of riches, let's talk about their alpha a little bit. CeeDee Lamb, 96 catches on the season, 1,200 plus yards, 8 touchdowns. He's an alpha. They feed him. They have no problems feeding him and getting the ball in his hands. What do the Buffalo Bills got to do to slow this guy down today?
Yeah, top 3 in catches, top 3 in receiving yards in the NFL for CeeDee Lamb, 8 receiving touchdowns. So he is an alpha receiver. He is I think, cementing himself as a top 5 type wide receiver in the NFL this year, or at least in the conversation, right, with some other guys. But to me, this is a game where communication for the Bills is going to have to be absolutely critical, and that's where losing a guy like Micah Hyde for this game is really, I think, from a CeeDee Lamb perspective, an area that is it's a huge knock to the Bills, I think, in this game, not having Micah Hyde back there for communication purposes. Now, with that said, Rasul Douglas has the size maybe to hang with CeeDee. CeeDee's but they move him around as well, right? They'll put CeeDee in the slot. They'll put him on the boundary. And I don't think there's a great answer for the Bills in this game. Douglas doesn't have the speed to hang with CeeDee. Taron Johnson maybe doesn't have the size to match up with him if he's in the slot. So it's going to be a team effort for the Bills. You cannot let CeeDee get cheap yak yardage, right? It's going to be a game where he's probably going to get his, but you're going to have to be keeping things in front of you, I think, if you're the Bills.
The best chance you have here, the Buffalo Bills, is just make sure you're communicating, make sure your zones are intact and they're tight, and you got to get pressure with 4. Like, if the Bills can't get pressure with 4, they're toast, because these guys will eat up some of these zone coverages. If Dak Prescott has time, if Dak Prescott can get out of the pocket, he can do stuff off script. The Buffalo Bills will be in some significant trouble. The last weapon I want to talk about before we move on to special teams is Jake Ferguson. Anyone who watches this show knows that we do a lot of pre-draft stuff here. We cover the pre-draft extensively once we get into January, February, March. One of my guys a couple of years ago was Jake Ferguson, and talk about a guy who was just drafted into a perfect situation. He sat for 1 year behind Dalton Schultz. Dalton Schultz becomes a free agent. He walks, goes to the Houston Texans. It was a slow start for Jake Ferguson, right? But he has come on of late, 51 catches this season for 570 yards, 5 touchdowns. Jake Ferguson is a guy the Buffalo Bills need to be aware of over the middle of the football field. He could give guys like Tyrell Dodson some issues. He could get guys like Taylor Rapp some issues, etc. He's a guy who I'm generally concerned about. I think he's the kind of guy who could pop off and have a couple of touchdowns if the Buffalo Bills aren't careful.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder kind of a little bit about, like, did the Cowboys really know what they had in Jake Ferguson if the rumors were true about them really wanting Dalton Kincaid in this draft, right?
Yeah.
You lose
They
Dalton
went after,
Schultz.
and then they drafted Schumacher in the second round, I believe, early third round.
Right. So I think, like, I don't even know that the Cowboys really knew what they had in Jake Ferguson in the offseason when they didn't sign anyone, when they missed out on Kincaid, they drafted Schumacher. Yes. Ferguson kind of just became like the de facto starter, right? Starting tight end for this team. And he hasn't relinquished it. Right. And I don't think the Cowboys really knew what kind of gem they had in Jake Ferguson. Obviously they drafted him, so they liked him, but with the stories about the Cowboys still hunting for tight ends in the offseason and drafting another, I don't know that they were 100% sold that he was going to be kind of the impact player that he's become. So another good outcome for the Cowboys here from an offensive skill position standpoint. Ferguson, it's great. He's good after the catch. He's got swagger, right? He's not afraid of contact. We saw the interactions with him and Jamal Adams a couple weeks ago. So emotionally, he's also a guy that can give an uplift to a team on the road that would be looking for some momentum. So you cannot just discount Ferguson just because of CeeDee Lamb and Tony Pollard.
Shifting our focus before we get into superlatives to special teams, you have Brandon Aubrey, the rookie kicker, versus Tyler Bass. You have Sam Martin versus Brian Anger. You have Deontay Hardy versus Kevontae Turpin. Special teams is going to be important today, right? Like, our kickers and punters are supposed to excel at home, while other teams' players are supposed to struggle in Highmark Stadium because of the way that stadium is constructed, because of the way that stadium is built, because of the way just the wind hits different in that stadium. That needs to be the case today. The Bills' special teams in all phases needs to be better than the Dallas Cowboys special teams. But I'll tell you what, Dave, I'm not confident, despite the fact that we have the home field advantage. I'm not confident that our special teams will be an advantage today.
Not super confident either. I think Dallas has the clear advantage in special teams. DVOA, they're 8th, Bills 21st. Brandon Aubrey hasn't missed a field goal all year. He's coming off that awesome game where he hit the 60+. Now, that was indoors.
Yeah,
he hasn't missed all year.
They play a lot of their games indoors.
Brian Anger is the number 1 net punt average punter in the NFL. Now, he hasn't had to punt a lot, but when he does get called upon, he is the number 1 net average punter in the NFL. So, and then you mentioned Turbin in the return game. So, to me, Dallas has a clear advantage on special teams. However, the wind and the weather could be an equalizer. And I'm not saying it's going to necessarily shift things to the Bills' advantage, because they haven't been pretty inconsistent, and I've been pretty disappointed, honestly, in the Bills' coverage units this year as well. But at least maybe closes the gap a little bit, and the advantage maybe that Dallas had in the kicking game gets shrunk a little bit. So I agree. Like, you need to make, I think you mentioned it, make Brandon Aubrey get tested, right? Force Dallas to try to kick field goals. And if Brandon Aubrey beats you because he's just that good of a kicker, hey, it's still a win for the Bills if he's kicking field goals and you're testing him in some tough conditions. So, yeah, this is special teams. I'm with you.
Brandon Aubrey's a guy who didn't even kick in college. He was a soccer player, right? Like, this could legitimately be the toughest test of Brandon Aubrey's career, is having to kick in Highmark Stadium in these conditions. So if you're the Buffalo Bills, you want to force as many field goals as you can today. You want to test this kid to see if he can hold up in these conditions. And like I mentioned at the top of the segment, like, this is supposed to be advantage Bills. Tyler Bass is supposed to know how to kick in the stadium as opposed to other kickers who come in here, right? Sam Martin, who's been here for almost a year and a half now, needs to know how to kick in the stadium, whereas guys like Brian Anger should struggle, right? It's going to really tick me off if Brian Anger outpunts Sam Martin, a guy who's supposed to understand how the wind works in the stadium. It's going to really tick me off if Tyler Bass misses a field goal or two in this game and Brandon Aubrey is perfect, right? Like, that's an issue. That's an issue that needs to be addressed, because it's supposed to be the advantage of playing in this stadium. And I'm just getting heated thinking about, like, what could possibly go wrong today on special teams and how angry and upset that will make me. And you got to contain Kevontae Turpin, because he is the league's most explosive return man. He was an all-pro last year. This game could literally come down to things like field position, right? Turnovers, field goals, clutch field goals, etc. So if you're the Buffalo Bills, you need to cross your T's and dot your I's on special teams today. And you got to hope that your stadium gives you an advantage, because the Dallas Cowboys are so good on special teams. All right, before we get into our pre-game superlatives, this show is brought to you by Picasso's Pizza. 4 great locations in Williamsville, West Seneca, Lancaster, and Blaisdell. Buffalo Pizza since 1980. You can order online at picassospizza.net. And if you're an out-of-towner like us, you can even get it mailed to your home. And I can tell you from experience, it is just as good as getting it fresh from the restaurant. Again, that is picassospizza.net. All right, let's get into it. Our pre-game superlatives. As always, we start with our Take Me Higher player of the game. This is a player not named Josh Allen who needs to step up in a big way for the Buffalo Bills to win this football game. Dave, I'll start with you. Comment section, hit us up with your Take Me Higher player of the games, and then we will move on to the next segment.
I mean, it's going to be easy to try to pick someone on offense, right? You could pick Dalton Kincaid, you could pick Stefon Diggs, but to me, this game, the number 1 and number 2 third down offenses in the NFL, Dallas first, Bills second, Bills undermanned on defense today, yet again, no AJ Epinesa, no Micah Hyde. To me, a guy that's going to have a big effect in both the run game and the pass game potentially today, maybe covering guys like Jake Ferguson, maybe being in the zone across the middle of the field. We didn't really talk about him much in the Bills defense segment. Terrell Bernard, to me, is a guy that has to show up big today. He's going to be key in helping in defending the run game against Tony Pollard, a key in defending and helping the screen game, a key in helping defend potentially some end around, reverse type plays, Turpin, right? Like he's going to have to be sideline to sideline on a lot of these, and potentially as well dropping back into some of the zone and making a play in the pass game over the middle of the field. We saw him doing this quite a bit early in the season, and I know he's battled back through some minor injuries, but I mean, to me, Terrell Bernard is a game for him on the defensive side of the ball as well to cement himself, and I think he really needs to have a good game today. So for me, it's Terrell Bernard.
Yeah, I'm gonna go on the offensive side of the ball, and I'm gonna go with Stefon Diggs. Other teams are not struggling to feed their star wide receivers, so whatever the issue is that is preventing Stefon Diggs from getting not just targeted, because I mean he's been targeted a ton, but being targeted effectively and making an impact on the game. The Buffalo Bills need to figure it out if they have any chance of keeping up with the Cowboys. They need to feed the wide receivers, not just the tight ends and the running backs in this game. So Stefon Diggs is my Take Me Higher player of the game. All right, on to the wild card player of the game. This is an under the radar player who could make a big play or two, have a big impact on this football game in order to help the Buffalo Bills win. Dave, who is your wild card player of the game?
Yeah, a lot's going to be made of Dalton Kincaid and the draft pick situation with him and Dallas potentially going for him and missing out. Good matchup for the tight ends. But my wild card player is going to be his running mate, Dawson Knox, in this game. Led tight ends and receivers in receiving yards last week against the Chiefs, had the 3 catches on the 3 targets. Another week healthier. It'll be interesting to see what the Bills do with him in line as well as a blocker. But I think Dawson Knox can make an impact in this game, in a game where we've talked a lot about the depth of the Dallas Cowboys skill position. The Bills struggling to get their receivers potentially involved. James Cook, how are they going to use him? Like, one area where the Bills do have maybe a slight advantage from an offensive weaponry standpoint is going too deep at tight end, having those guys both available to you. So to me, I like Dawson Knox as a wild card player today. Low volume maybe, but maybe a touchdown for Dawson Knox today.
My wild card player of the game is going to be Von Miller. I think he looked better last week after the bye with no knee brace. I think we'll see an even increased role for him with AJ Epinesa out. I think that you're going to see Von Miller make a game-changing play or two at some point during this contest. All right, on to our Respect You player of the game. Dave, who is the one player on the Dallas Cowboys you got to respect in this one? And I mean, there is a laundry list of players to choose from.
I mean, I think for me, it's going to start and end with Micah Parsons. It's the easy answer, but I think the Bills, again, we talk about Dallas staying sort of on their script, getting a lead, letting Micah Parsons loose, 12.5 sacks on the season, number 2 rated edge defender on the season for PFF, just an absolute stud. They line him up all over the field. You have to be aware of where he is at all times. Even in neutral game script, they're going to let him loose. And he's the type of guy who will make an absolute game-changing play if given the chance. So for me, a lot of options, but kind of public enemy number 1 for me today is Micah Parsons. That offensive line is going to have to do a lot better job than they did last week against the Chiefs.
Yeah, obviously, guys like Micah Parsons, guys like CeeDee Lamb, guys like Dak Prescott, they all have to be respected. We talked at length about Tony Pollard and the impact that he could have on this game, Jake Ferguson, the impact he can have on this game. So I'm gonna go with Stephon Gilmore, right? He's battling the illness, but he's expected to play today. He did a really good job last week of when he was on AJ Brown and when he was on Devontae Smith of locking those guys down.
Revenge game.
revenge game. You know, he was mad that he had to play for 5 years or 4 years, whatever it was, in Buffalo. That face he had on draft night never left for the entire 5 years he was here. Stefon Diggs is going to have a challenge on his hands, and if Stephon Gilmore can lock down Stefon Diggs, the Bills are going to be in trouble because they have to score points in order to win this football game against the Dallas Cowboys, and it's really hard to score points when your alpha wide receiver can't be an alpha wide receiver. So I'm going to go with Stefon Diggs as my respect you player of the game. All right, on now to our fire sale, our hottest take of this football game. Dave, I'll start with you. What's your hottest take of this football game?
Well, I'm gonna lean in a bit to your wild card play here. I think a multi-sack game for Von Miller in this game. He looked better last week. I think Dak Prescott sacked 29 times so far this year, 13th most in the league. Terrence Steele, the weak link on the right side of that Dallas Cowboys offensive line. I would expect Von Miller to be lining up there in pass rush situations, spelling for Gregory Rousseau. So at the end of the day, like, this is your time to shine, Von Miller. Show people that you still got gas left in the tank. Show people that you can show up in big games, which has been your MO throughout your entire career with the Denver Broncos and with the LA Rams. Today is the day. Multi-sack game for Von Miller is my hot take.
Spin 0481 comes in, says Josh Allen rushing for 80 plus yards. That is his hot take. And I will go with Dalton Kincaid. I think Dalton Kincaid is going to step up in a big way in this game. He's got to keep pace with Sam Laporta, right? He's got to show Dallas exactly what they missed out on when the Buffalo Bills traded up. So I'm going to go with Dalton Kincaid, 2 touchdowns today. 2 touchdowns for Dalton Kincaid. That is my prediction for him. And speaking of predictions, let's get into our game predictions now. And Dave, I'll start with you. Paint a picture for us. Take us back to the future. What are we going to be saying about this game when it is over?
Well, the offense for the Bills, obviously, Eagles game, they came out and they played well, struggled a little bit in the second half in that Chiefs game, didn't really put the nail in the coffin. I think the Bills offense today carries the day, right? The Bills defense is again undermanned. I think they'll do enough. I think, like I said, Von Miller make couple big plays. Terrell Bernard's going to have a good game, but I don't think this is going to be a 2017 type affair like the Bills had with the Chiefs last week. I expect this game to be much higher scoring. I expect this game, again, weather aside, we'll see how that maybe affects things, but I do expect both teams to be aggressive on fourth downs, knowing what's at stake. Dallas obviously has the NFC East at stake. The Bills have their playoff lives on the line. Both teams will be very aggressive today, and I think there'll be a lot of points. Bills will lose the toss and they have a chance to get on the field first, and they're going to go down opening drive of the game, score points. And I think from there, it'll be pretty back and forth this entire game with at the end, the Bills getting a lead, the Bills defense being on the field yet again with a lead with under 2 minutes to go. However, the Cowboys will need a touchdown to win it, and the Bills will hold them off at the end. I think Bills 34, Cowboys 31 in this one.
Awesome. Carl Tillman comes in and says, offense rolls. Sam Martin never sees the field. Hey, Sam Martin can't be outplayed by Brian Anger if Sam Martin doesn't play.
Excuse me. Bills 34, Cowboys 30. I said they needed a touchdown to win at the end. So take 1 point off the Cowboys.
Charles G coming in saying 27-24 Bills. Axon Jackson, 42-17 good guys. Roy Collins says Dallas 30-23. Unfortunately, that might be the first. Roy, you might be the first person not to pick the Bills this year in the comment section. I'm not gonna lie.
Someone picked the Eagles as well.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm gonna go Bills 38, Cowboys 35 in an absolute shootout. I think that the Buffalo Bills defense ends up on the field again to end the game. I think Dallas works the ball into field goal range. But how about this? Brandon Aubrey, he hasn't missed a kick all year. I think he misses a game-tying field goal from 40-plus yards.
Nice.
And the Buffalo Bills have 11 men on the field when he does it. And the Buffalo Bills win the game on a Brandon Aubrey missed field goal, a walk-off missed field goal. The Bills win 38-35. That is my prediction. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that will just about do it for this pregame show. You can catch us tomorrow at 9 p.m. for Bills Cowboys postgame. don't forget, you have a couple of things coming out your way this evening. You have the Greg Tomset Sports Show. You have the Cover One post-game show live tonight following the game. And obviously, David Fox will always have his post-game report on cover1.football immediately following the game as well. I want to talk a little bit about this Jets-Dolphins game before we head out of here as well. The Dolphins, man, the tide could be turning, especially if the Bills can get a win today and the Jets can get an upset over the Dolphins. You could see a changing of the tide in the AFC East because the Dolphins, the injury bug is starting to hit, right? They lost Jalen Phillips a couple of weeks ago. Tyreek Hill could miss this game against the Jets today. Connor Williams, their starting center, is out for the season. Liam Eichenberg, who's not a very good center, their backup center. The Bills smoked him in week 4 when Connor Williams was out with a less significant injury. He's dealing with a calf. They have literally 2 guys they signed off the street, Max Skura and Jonathan Harrison, who could be starting at center today, going up against Quinnen friggin' Williams and the New York Jets defense. Zach Wilson, I don't know, figured out something last week. He was the AFC Offensive Player of the Week. If the Jets can do their job today and upset the Miami Dolphins, who are injury riddled, and the Buffalo Bills can beat the Dallas Cowboys, right? We are looking at a legitimate shot for the Buffalo Bills to win the AFC East. And we're looking at a real changing of the tide late in the season.
Yeah, and look, I know this game's in Miami, but the Jets do come in with a little momentum, scoring 30 points last week against the Texans. Now, I know Stroud was knocked out of that game, but the Jets did their thing. Zach Wilson, one of his best games of the season, if not his best game of the season. They got Breece Hall really involved in the passing game. And if you're the Jets, know what you've got, right? Feed Garrett Wilson, use Breece Hall in the passing game, and let your defense do the rest, right? Like, I think if Tyreek does play, he's not going to be 100%. There's no doubt about it. He did not look the same when he came back into that game against the Titans last week. And I'm not saying that he still won't have an impact on the game, but that's big. Like he's not probably going to have the same level of impact if he was obviously 100%. So whether or not he goes or not, it's still an advantage for the Jets because he's not going to be fully healthy. And, Achane, he's not 100% healthy. Mostert came into the game with a knee injury as well. He's playing. So they're banged up, the offense for the Dolphins. So will be quite interesting to see what happens. Like Jalen Waddle, maybe he's an X factor for the Dolphins in this game. But ultimately, the Jets have a golden opportunity on their hands. And even though Jets fans are rooting for the Bills to lose, we as Bills fans are rooting for the Jets to win today. So let's go Jets.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, Bills Mafia, prepare yourselves for 3 hours of commercial-free football before the Buffalo Bills take on the Dallas Cowboys at 4:25 Eastern on Fox in Orchard Park. And until next time, go Bills.
Go Bills.
Thank you for watching tonight's episode of the Air Raid Hour. Make sure to hit that like button on the way out. If you are catching the show on demand, leave a reply in the comments section and we will respond over the course of the week. You can always listen to every episode next day on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, by searching Air Raid Buffalo. Thank you for your continued support, and as always, go Bills!